Hey everyone, welcome back. Thank you for being so patient. We are going to be making this gluten-free vegan pizza from scratch today. There is quite a few steps, so make sure you check out the notes in the description. And yes, I will be showing you how to make the cheese, the sauce, the crust, and we will be chopping up all of our veggies that are going to go on the top of the pizza. There's this one that's like a gooey kind of cheese that you don't have to melt down. It's kind of already melted, but you can just brown it. And that one is the easiest version. And then there is the mossball cheese. So this is the one that kind of looks like mozzarella cheese. And then lastly, we have our sliceable hard cheese. And this one melts as well. And you can use this one for like a charcuterie board, cheese and crackers, pizza, etc. You get the point. So let's get started on the soft melted cheese. First up, we are going to add 1 cup of coconut cream to our blender. And I'm using Trader Joe's version. And then you're going to add 2 tablespoons of tapioca starch. And then you're going to add 1 teaspoon of sea salt. This onion powder and garlic powder that I will be adding is optional. And I add a half a teaspoon of each of these. It just adds a lot of like umami flavor to it. And of course, the smoked paprika is necessary. I just eyeball this with just a few sprinkles of it. And if you want that yellow orange color for a hard cheese type look, add a few sprinkles of the turmeric here and you'll get that desired color. Next up, you're going to pour this into a pot and you are going to heat this on a medium high. You'll notice that it'll start to bubble and you're going to want to continue to stir this. I'm using a ceramic pot, so you'll notice it's not sticking to the bottom of the pan, but it's also thickening up. And this is what you want. You want to cook this for about 10 minutes. And the reason being is because you want to cook off some of that coconut flavor. Don't get me wrong, we love coconut flavor, but not for the cheese. So the more you cook it down, the more you'll notice that it doesn't really have that coconutty aftertaste. This is not something that you want to let just sit and boil in your pot for too long. You want to make sure you're constantly stirring this. After you get to this texture, you can turn off the heat, and as you'll notice, it'll start to thicken up a little bit more, just like this. You can literally put this in the fridge in a container, and this is the texture that you get after it's been refrigerated. This is me just showing you guys an example on some of the bread that I've made, and I'm going to heat it up so you can see how it melts yourself. I just placed this in the oven on a low broiling temperature, and look at that, it starts browning like actual cheese does. Here's a little cheese pool for you guys in slow motion. It's super hot and addicting. So let's move on to the next cheese, the sliceable hard cheese. So in order to make this cheese, you're going to follow all the steps of the last cheese that we just made, and you're going to turn that off. And then we are going to make an agar-agar concoction, which is basically going to thicken the cheese for us. And if you're not aware, agar-agar is basically a seaweed that is a thickening agent. So first up, you're going to start with 1 cup of cold water into a pot, and you are going to sprinkle 3 tablespoons of agar-agar into the pot, but do not turn on the heat just yet until you have mixed this thoroughly. I'm not sure why the water needs to be cold, but it has something to do with how to activate the agar-agar. And then you're going to turn on the heat once it's been mixed. So we will be bringing this to a boil. After that, you are going to let it simmer for about 5 minutes while you mix it up. Some people like to just let it simmer without mixing it, but I was scared that mine was going to harden because it looked like it was getting really thick. As you can see here, the texture starts to really thicken up. So I started to mix it with my spoon. While it's still really hot, we are going to want to move this mixture into our cheese mixture to make it hard. But for a close-up of the texture, here is what you're looking for. This is what we are going for. This is what we want. This is what's going to create that sliceable hard cheese. So here we are pouring it into the other mixture. You're going to want to turn the heat back on and start mixing this up until it has been completely mixed together. And you guys get the point, so I'm going to speed this up to our next step. Once this is thoroughly mixed, you'll be able to tell because everything will be blended in and it won't look like it's 2 separate components. And it'll basically look like what our last cheese looked like while it was at the boiling stage when it was really, really hot. The only difference is the cool down is going to look very different. One thing I do want to note is that since we added a lot of the agar-agar to this mixture, you're going to want to add a little bit more salt to taste to this if you prefer. I actually do. I added a little bit more to this just because adding the agar-agar can kind of drown out that saltiness, which a lot of hard cheese does have. So I added about another half a teaspoon, but make sure you taste it. Just be careful because while it is boiling at this level, it is extremely hot and you will burn yourself. So make sure to let it cool before you try it. I added a little bit more smoked paprika to this one for color and a little more of a smoky flavor for the hard cheese, but that's optional. You can really add whatever you'd like at this time. If you want to add sliced jalapenos, if you want to add some pepper flakes, you can really do as you wish at this stage. We're about to pour it into a container, and then we're going to let it cool off, and then we'll place it in the fridge. After you let it cool off from being extremely boiling hot and then you place it in the fridge, it only takes about 30 minutes to actually harden. It hardens really fast. So after you've covered it and placed it in the fridge for that 30 minutes, this is what you're going to get. All I had to do was loosen up the edges and it comes out very firm and perfect. Now, with the firmness of this cheese, you could shred it if you want to, but we're not going to shred it today. We are just going to slice it, and this will be the cheese that we are going to use on the pizza in this example on this video. But to be honest, you can use any of the 3 cheeses that I show you on here to make the pizza. I just decided to use this one because it was easier to cut them and just place them on the crust. And here I am just demonstrating to you guys how easy this cheese slices and the different ways that you can use them. I cut them up into these little small squares because this is what I'm going to use for the pizza. I would actually recommend the shreddable way if you're going to make it for the pizza. It's just be a little bit easier and it'll cook a little bit faster versus the squares, but this is what I was using. I was really trying to get this video done because this was my second time recording it. A few things had went wrong the first time, so I was just trying to get it out the way. And so when it comes to storing this cheese, it actually stores very well. I'm sure you can freeze it, but I haven't done that yet. But as you can see here, I just put it back into the container with the top and put it back into the fridge and then use it as I please. Next up, we're going to make the mozzarella ball textured cheese. So for this one, you're going to also follow the same steps as you did in the first melted cheese, except for the second part. While you're making the agar concoction, you're only going to use 2 tablespoons of the agar, and you're going to add that to 3/4 cup of cold water, and then follow the same steps as you saw me do with the last concoction. You're going to wait until it gets thick, and then you're going to mix it with the cheese. From there, you're going to want to let it cool down until you are able to touch it with your hands, and then you are going to make a saltwater bath for your moss balls. Sorry, somehow this portion did not get recorded. Basically, all you do is get some distilled water and you're going to add some ice cubes with about a tablespoon or 2, however salty you like it, of sea salt. From here, you're going to scoop up the cheese as you saw me doing earlier, and you are going to drop them into the ice bath. You want to leave them for about 10 minutes, let them cool off, make sure they're completely cool, thoroughly cool all the way through. And then after those 10 minutes, I'm just forming them a little bit just to make them a little bit more into like the consistency and texture of the actual like mozzarella balls. As you'll see, these ones are a little bit extra softer than I would have liked them to be, but that's why I had you guys do 2 tablespoons instead of teaspoons, because for this recipe I did exactly teaspoons. So that's just a note. If you want this exact texture, I would go with 2 teaspoons. If you want it a little bit more harder and a little bit more rounder, I would use 2 tablespoons. Now, I know these ones are not perfect like some that you'll see, but this was just me experimenting with them and giving you guys some different texture options. I just really wanted to get this video out to you guys, and I was going to leave this one out, but I was like, you know what, let me just put it in there so they can kind of see how many options you have as far as the different types of textures of cheese that will melt. In here, I just wanted to give you guys an example of how to slice through the cheese and the texture and what it looks like on the inside. As you can see, you can even chop it up into smaller pieces and then put them back in the container for the fridge, or if you want to make smaller pieces to put them on the pizza, whatever works for you. I'm just showing you guys different options. And of course, this one melts as well. All of these cheeses melt. And as you can see, they kind of have a little bit of a stretch pull as well if you just pull them apart. And you can even mold them kind of back into little balls. And now that we've got that down, let's move on to the gluten-free crust. The base of this crust is made from steamed potatoes, and we're gonna need 2 cups. So I have about 4 big potatoes that I'm peeling the skins from because you don't want the skins. We won't be using them in this recipe. And then I'm gonna steam them for about 40 minutes. I love this glass steamer that I had got from Amazon. I'll link it below, but I have some on here with skins as well, and those are for a separate dish for later. But the ones on the right are the ones that I'm going to be using for this pizza crust. The thing I love about this steamer is that I can just set the time and let it go, and then once it's done, it beeps and turns itself off. Once they were done steaming, I let them cool off for just a bit, and then I put 2 cups of them into a large bowl and I started mashing them down with a fork. In my case here, I let them cool down a little bit too long, so they got a little tough. But if this happens to you, it's no problem. All you have to do is add a little bit of some hot water to it and they'll start to mash much easier. Next up, we are going to add 6 tablespoons of some coconut flour. The brand that I'm using is just a simple brand from Rayleigh's. It was really reasonably priced. I think it was like $5 for this whole bag. And make sure to keep a little bit extra on the side because when we roll out the dough, we're going to be placing it on a little bit of coconut flour. Next up, we are going to use some arrowroot starch or arrowroot flour, 6 tablespoons of this as well. After that, we are going to add 1 teaspoon of sea salt, and then we are going to start to mash this all together. And as you'll see, I added the water, the hot water from my kettle. At this point, I pretty much just eyeballed it, add a little bit at a time if that was the case for you. But if you started mashing the potatoes and making this recipe as soon as they were done steaming, you will not need to add any extra hot water. So I'm going to speed this up while you see me just mashing it because that's pretty much all I'm doing for a few minutes. Really just mashing it together with the fork, trying to make sure that there are not any clumps. What I love about this recipe is that both of those flours give it the taste and texture of an actual pizza crust with gluten. One thing I will say is we didn't use any baking powder in this, so it doesn't rise, but I should try that next time. That just gave me an idea. Regardless, it's the taste and texture what we're going for. As you can see, I kind of used my fist to pound down some of the flour. What I do here to make this a little bit easier for me is I grab a bunch of the dough in my hand and I just squeeze it and it all starts to blend together and it forms larger balls of dough, which in turn I end up combining all together at the end. If you find an easier way to do it, that is awesome. Do whatever works best for you. I could have laid this all out on some parchment paper and just kind of like really pressed it down with my hands, but this seemed a little bit easier for me. And the reason being is because until it's all uniformly put together, it can be very crumbly, and I just didn't want to clean up all the mess and have all the crumbs all on the counter while I'm trying to roll out the pizza. So as you can see, I continue to clump it all together with my hand and continue to press it down until it gets into a ball like this. This is where it is pretty much ready to lay out on the parchment paper and get to baking. And so this right here is the texture that you want. You should be able to push your fingers into the dough and it keep form. Make sure your oven is preheated to 425, and we are going to roll out some parchment paper onto our pizza pan or whatever pan you are using. And as I mentioned earlier, you are going to use that excess coconut flour to make sure that it doesn't stick and so that it has a little bit of that grainy texture on the bottom of the pizza crust when it's done cooking. You know how like regular pizzas have that? So anyways, from here you could use a roller pin, but to me it's just a lot easier for me to roll it out with my hands because while it's in this state it could break a little bit easier, and I noticed with my hands I can make it perfectly round and laid out exactly how I want it to. So I usually start off in the center and just kind of keep pushing it down, and as you can see it'll start to flatten and expand outwardly, and that's where I start to form the edge of the crust by kind of pinching it almost like a pie. And I'm gonna do that all the way around, making it nice and uniform. And at this point, depending on how thick you like your crust, you can either leave it like this or expand it a little bit more to make more of a thinner crust. And that's pretty much it for that. I am now going to get ready to put this in the oven at 425, and I'm going to cook it for 15 minutes. And after those 15 minutes, we are going to bring it back, and this is how it should look. You want it to be just browned a little bit, and then we are going to flip it over and put it back in the oven. I used some parchment paper here to flip it over. It made it easier just in case I didn't want it to break. At this stage, it could still be really delicate because it hasn't completely hardened yet. And this is just me kind of showing you guys exactly what it should look like because sometimes our ovens work differently. So I just want to make sure that you know this is what it should look like because you don't want your pizza crust to burn after we put the toppings on. And next up, we are going to prepare our toppings. And this is where you can get real creative. I made this pizza a few times, and so I actually recorded a few variations of some things I used. I love fresh garlic, so I usually crush some garlic and add it to my toppings. But what we're gonna do here is prepare everything and then set it aside for when we are prepared to decorate our pizza. And next up, we're gonna cut up some mushrooms. You can slice them however you'd like. I like to just slice mine simply like this. They give a great umami flavor to the pizza, and you can use whichever kind of mushrooms you'd like. I also really love chanterelle mushrooms and oyster mushrooms, but I didn't have any of those on hand, so these ones will do. I also like a little bit of a kick to my pizza, so I am slicing some serrano peppers, but jalapenos would be great if you don't like too much spice. And to add a little bit of texture and sweetness, I chopped up some bell peppers and some onion and picked a little bit of basil too off of my little basil plant. And now our little toppings plate is all set and ready to go. Next, we're going to make the sauce. So the first step in making this tomato sauce is you are going to need some tomato paste. We will be using 5 to 6 tablespoons and mix it with a little bit of water to get this consistency that you see here. And then we are going to add a half a teaspoon of dried oregano, a few dashes of some smoked paprika. I used about 4. And gave it a little bit of a mix after that. And then we are going to add a half a teaspoon of some dried basil leaves. After mixing, you'll notice that you may need a little bit more water. So I'm going to add a little bit more here. And then I'm going to mix it up a little bit just to make sure that I have the right texture and consistency that I want for the pizza sauce. And then we are going to add a half a teaspoon of some sea salt. After we mix that up, we are going to add a few dashes of some onion powder and garlic powder. When you add some of these spices, you will notice that it will start to thicken up a little bit more, so I do add a little bit more water here. My suggestion would be to add a little bit of water at a time so that it doesn't get too runny, because all of our tomato sauces or spices could react differently. And now we are going to spread this all on the pizza. I spread mine all the way around the pizza except for the edges, and you'll notice that you might have a little bit more of the tomato sauce left over, which is totally fine because we might have to add a little bit more later. And so after this, we are going to want to add our hard cheese. I should have shredded the cheese, but the slices will work totally fine. Any of the cheeses that I showed you how to make will work on this pizza. From here, you are going to put your pizza in the broiler for 3 to 5 minutes, and then this should be your end result. We're going to add the toppings and add a little bit of extra sauce to the areas that it might have dried up a little bit. We add the cheese and the toppings separate because the cheese takes a little bit longer to melt. And then from here, you're going to place it in the broiler again for another 3 to 5 minutes, but really make sure you watch it because it can burn really fast. I suggest using the low broiler setting just in case because I had burnt mine the first time I made it and it wasn't too bad. I just don't want you guys making that same mistake, but this is the outcome. Look at that, the char on the cheese and a little bit of the veggies. I added a little bit of some pepper flakes on mine, and this is what it looked like after I cut me a slice. It's crazy how you can't tell that this is a vegan pizza. The only difference is a lot of regular pizzas have pepperoni on them, and I'm not a huge fan of the fake processed meats, but look at that bend. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do a mukbang for you guys for this one, but please know I ate this whole thing by myself. These pizza recipes that I have been working on have been the first that I've eaten in 7 years since being vegan. You guys know I don't do a lot of the preservatives or corn, etc. So creating this recipe was extremely nostalgic for me, and I know you guys will love it too. So see you guys in the next video. Bye.